So super. All right. So wrapping up unit 1 here tonight. Again, unit 1's the foundations unit. So lots of important information here yet, but basic government concepts. Okay. So again, you guys have questions, you know the rule. You just stop me, interrupt me. We talk about it because chances are if you have the question, somebody else does. So kind of just picking up where we left off. We had talked through ratification of the Constitution the last time. We talked through some of the serious agreements that were made there, like the Great Compromise that sets up the structure of our government. How when it came to electing our president, we decided that we were going to use an electoral college, the brightest and the most, most politically inclined people, because, we as normal citizens didn't know enough, but hey, the government will let us vote to feel good about ourselves. Talked a little 3/5 compromise, how slaves at that time would be counted towards the state's population for the purpose of representation. And then we also talked about the only agreement made about slavery at the Constitutional Convention, even though it was the big elephant in the room, which brings me to my next point. And I forget why, maybe we didn't bring this up last time, but why was slavery kind of like the untouched issue at the convention?
I think the founding fathers knew if they talked about it, they would probably strangle each other before they got out of it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It would have turned into, rock and roll party in the streets. It would have been a riot. It would have been chaos. Like, the other thing too is, think about this, is the constitutional framers wanted the states to approve the Constitution. And so if they started making rules about slavery, where it could exist, where it could not exist, could it exist, could it not exist, that probably would have been the straw that really broke the camel's back. And so for those reasons, they kind of left it alone. The only agreement they came to is that 20 years after the ratification of the Constitution, is that the importation of new slaves would end. Okay. And that was really the only thing that came up, not like the slave trade within the United States, because obviously that continued on for nearly another 100 years. But that probably would have broke this deal before it even got its start. So keep that in mind. All right. So moving along here, we talked a little Patriot Act too as well last week. And we had reintroduced Fed 51. Again, Bob Ross, pretty little trees. Trees have branches, checks and balances. The branches of government have powers that limit each other. Separation of powers, dividing the powers out across three governments, or three branches, my bad. Again, ambition has to counteract ambition. Crab bucket theory. If all men were angels, no government would be necessary. But again, all men are not angels. So we have to have something in place to limit the ambition of our politicians. And so we come up with this radical idea, or this rad idea, I should say, of checks and balances, making sure that the branches of government have powers to limit each other. Okay. Again, Bob Ross, Pretty Little Trees. And then this is kind of where we had left off. We had started talking, we had gotten, we had kind of left off at federalism. And so that's the last few topics here of the unit, centers around the idea of federalism. Again, the word federalism is not used anywhere in the Constitution. When the Bill of Rights gets ratified, right, all powers not given to the federal government are reserved for the states. But again, the powers of the states are not mentioned. There is nothing in the Constitution. I know we hammered this in class. There is nothing in the Constitution stating what the states can do. It just says that the states can do what is not barred, right? Because there's some literature in the Constitution that says states cannot do this, or this, but there's nothing saying this is what the states can do, right? So the founding fathers, the framers, they kind of left that open to interpretation, which has created a bit of a cluster over the course of the past couple hundred years. But it is what it is, and government's awesome. All right, so getting into exclusive and concurrent powers. So to kind of clarify all this, any power given to the national government is called a delegated power, because the powers of the national government are outlined in the Constitution. Okay. We call those delegated powers, or expressed powers. Either way, two words, they mean the same thing. When you see delegated or expressed power, it means a power of the national government. those powers are found mostly in Article 1, Section 8, clauses 1 through 18, the powers of Congress. Okay. Clause 18 is the wild card because, Professor, I know you're a big Constitution guy. What does Clause 18 say?
The national government has the right to pass any legislation that's necessary and proper, I believe.
Correct. We also sometimes call that the what clause? Somebody not named somebody not named the professor.
Necessary and proper clause.
Necessary and proper clause. Okay. Also known as the material that makes up the waistband in your sweatpants.
Elastic.
Elastic clause. Love it. Yep. It allows the national government to stretch their powers. Okay. We'll come back to that, but keep that in the back of your mind. So again, delegated express powers, 2 words, same thing. It's a power of the national government. Okay. Some of those powers of the national government are exclusive. Again, exclusive basically meaning that only the national government can do those things. So like declaring war, coining money, things of that nature. Okay. Those are only things that can be done by the national government. They're exclusive, kind of like when you're in an exclusive relationship, you're only seeing one person. Again, exclusive meaning only the national government can do this. The states have to kind of leave that alone. Okay. Where federalism becomes confusing, though, is that there are powers that over the course of time, for efficiency purposes, have become shared powers, or what we call concurrent. Okay. Concurrent meaning that both the national government and the state governments can do that. What might be an example of one of those?
Impose taxes.
Yep. Taxing is a big one. Okay, we pay state income taxes in North Dakota. We also pay federal income taxes. What might be another?
Would education be one?
Oh, it's kind of become one, Micah. It's kind of become one. Again, that's where we get into the marble cake federalism. That's where we get into cooperative federalism. But I guess kind of, sort of, yeah, maybe. Another one that I'm thinking of is creating new courts, right? We have state courts, we have federal courts. Punishing lawbreakers could be another one. We have state level laws where a person can get charged by the state, federal level laws, people can be charged by the feds. So you're thinking things like that. Okay. We call those concurrent, and that's really where federalism becomes messy. Now, getting into our 2 models of federalism, there's 2 of them that we talked about in class. We have the layer cake, what we call dual federalism, and then we have the marble cake that we called cooperative. Again, dual federalism, that really used to be the model up until, I would say, probably until the Great Depression is when it really started to become more of a marbled model. But really up until the Great Depression, New Deal time period in the 1930s into the 1940s, we really operate under a dual federalism model. I mean, the states, don't get me wrong, they still kind of push the boundaries and challenge what was what, i.e. McCulloch versus Maryland would be a good example of that with the National Bank. But really starting with the New Deal, that's when we start to see the lines blurring a little bit. Again, with the New Deal, the federal government started offering assistance and public works programs and this thing and that thing and the other. And ever really since then, nearly 100 years ago, we start to see the lines blur a little bit. Okay. Now, with federalism now, what the federal government does to really get the states to do what it is that they want to do is, or to get the federal government to get the states to do what the federal government wants them to do, is they offer grants. Okay. There's a whole variety of grants. We talked about block grants, categorical grants. Those are some of the big ones. Again, a categorical grant basically means that money has to be used for a certain category of spending. So if the states, like if the government gives grant money to states and they say, okay, this money has to be used for education, it must be used for textbooks or teachers' pay or providing free school lunches, right? That kind of makes the states, it forces their hand to have to spend the money in one of those areas. In return for accepting that grant money, the schools kind of have to follow some federal guidelines, i.e. No Child Left Behind, right? Which, anyways, I don't want to get too political because this is being recorded, but think of things like that. Okay. So that'd be like a block or a categorical grant. A block grant, again, a little bit different. And then you have unfunded mandates, right? An unfunded mandate could be something like ADA, where the national government just says, hey, states, you're going to do this because it's what we want you to do. Okay. Again, states prefer the grants that have the least amount of restrictions, where they can start to use that money how they see fit. But that's kind of what's become our federalism model. Is the federal government kind of likes to get its fingers into things that might not necessarily be federal authority, but over the course of time, because of the tie back to funding, they've kind of have become federal initiatives. So like Micah brought up the idea of education. Again, education, as far as I know, is mentioned exactly nowhere in the Constitution. It's not in there. It's something that's evolved over the course of time. As a way, as something that, hey, the national government has an interest in an educated society. And so for those reasons, there is maybe some funding things that get tied back to that. Okay. But understand that, again, with the grant models and things, that's really how the national government has kind of started to stretch its powers, and where our model of federalism has become more marbled in the idea that the federal government wants, they want more control. Okay. This is something obviously that like a Brutus or an anti-federalist would have hated such initiatives, because it's a way of the national government to extend its control. I'm just looking for something here in the textbook because I want to make sure that I said something correctly that I'm now questioning myself on. So just bear with me. Any questions on that? We also talk about, perfect. We also talk about things like devolution. Again, devolution would be the national government giving some power back to the states. That's a big idea here. And the other big one, so talk about the two types of grants. So we have categorical and we have block. Again, the states prefer block grants because block grants have more freedom with how money is spent. So like one that I'm thinking of is ESSER. So ESSER was something that was passed during coronavirus. The schools and the states received, the schools received money from the state received money from the federal government, and that those ESSER dollars could be used for a whole variety of things. So like some of our ESSER dollars at the school got used to cover school lunches. Some of our ESSER dollars got used to do some things with our school wellness facility, right? There was a lot of leeway in how some of that money was used. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. So states by far prefer block grants over categorical grants, but they prefer either type of grant over an unfunded mandate, because with an unfunded mandate, you don't have, it's the Fed is basically telling the states to do something, but not giving them money. So like in the case of ADA or the Americans with Disabilities Act, states were required to put in like handicap parking and handicap accessible restrooms, elevators, so on and so forth. And they didn't really receive any money for that. Okay. So that was something that, even though I think anybody with a moral compass would say this is the right thing to do, states weren't necessarily super jazzed about it, just based on the fact that, again, it was a very expensive undertaking and the national government did not give any money back. Okay. Questions on categorical or block grants or grants and aid in general? The other one there that I want to touch on here really quick is revenue sharing. Okay. And revenue sharing, again, is another type of a grant that the states like, because it's when the federal government gives some of the federal tax money back to the states. There's not a ton of strings attached. and it's something that isn't as common anymore. Like most of the time when states are getting money now in the present day, it's coming in the form of a block or a categorical grant. So just be aware of that. But again, that's a big part of federalism. Again, the idea how we split powers between the national and the federal governments. Okay. Kind of rewinding here just a little bit, the other power we need to talk about. So we talked expressed / delegated / enumerated powers, with exclusive powers as well. Talked reserve powers that are left for the states. The only other power that I want to bring up is what we call implied. And those are the powers that thus fall under the necessary and proper clause. Okay. So like, for example, in the Constitution, it says Congress has the power to declare war. Okay. It does not say anywhere in the Constitution that Congress has the ability to manufacture, pay for nuclear weapons, but we have those. And so that kind of falls under that necessary and proper clause. Another example could be going back to like a McCulloch versus Maryland. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that Congress has the power to create a national bank, but Congress does have the power to tax and to coin money. And so those are two things that kind of go hand in hand with a bank. Okay, so keep those things in mind as well, are different types of powers. All right, rolling along here, looking at some different interpretations of federalism. And what gets brought up here then, two important ones are the 10th Amendment, the 14th Amendment. We'll start with those. Again, 10th Amendment, it's the Texas Roadhouse Amendment, is what I like to call it. Again, Texas is a state, Texas Roadhouse, ha. You go into Texas Roadhouse on a Friday night, there's probably not a ton of seating available. But when you walk into the restaurant, you see like a small little booth in the back of the room. Well, that one's for you. That one's for the people, for the states. Again, all powers not given to the federal government are left or reserved for the states. Another big amendment that's become a topic of federalism over the course of time is the 14th Amendment, especially with like the due process clause and the equal protection clause. Again, the due process clause historically has been used to apply the Bill of Rights to the states. What do we call that process? Bill of Rights being applied back to the states. I want you guys to know that one forever.
Selective incorporation.
Thank you, Owen Wiersma. Yes, selective incorporation, piecemeal process. Bill of Rights gets applied back to the states because originally the Bill of Rights only applied to the protection from the federal government. Okay, so like the incorporation cases are McDonald versus Chicago, Gideon versus Wainwright. Those are the two that you need to know. Another part of the Constitution that's created some tension with federalism over the course of time is the Commerce Clause. Again, what qualifies as commerce? Well, Constitution says that Congress has the ability to regulate interstate commerce, interstate meaning between the states. That's the same reason why the national government's been able to pass new laws, for example, pertaining to those who drive trucks with, what's it called? FMSCA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act, where there's now some really tight regulations on acquiring a CDL, right? Before it was kind of up to the states to license drivers, including commercial drivers, but now with the FMCSA or SCA, whatever it's called, it's made it a little bit of a heartache, especially for schools to get bus drivers. We can talk about that a separate time when we're not being recorded. But again, another part of the Commerce Clause too, where it's faced challenges is like with segregation, especially. That was something, there was a case called Heart of Atlanta Motel. If you're feeling cray-cray on the internet, professor, I recommend reading about Heart of Atlanta. It's not a required case anymore. It used to be at one point, no longer. But the case that's really applicable with the Commerce Clause is US v. Lopez. Again, still my bet to see the AP FRQ on this for the Supreme Court question. Again, they're going to try to trick you because AP, they want you to say that US v. Lopez was what type of case? Not a Commerce Clause case, but a case involving the
Second Amendment.
And it wasn't. And you guys know that because we spent days and hours on this thing. Okay. Again, US v. Lopez involves the Gun-Free Safety Zone Act of America, where again Congress passed this law, which again I think everybody in their right mind would say nobody needs to carry a gun on school property. However, Again, a young man in Texas decided he was going to do that. He gets charged federally, challenges it. Supreme Court says, you know what? He shouldn't have brought a gun to school, but Congress, under the Commerce Clause, like they said they did, does not have the power to pass such laws because this, in fact, is not commerce. Now, something like regulating, like states giving exclusive privileges, Gibbons v. Ogden, not a required case. States giving exclusive permission to somebody to use a river for trade. Well, they can't do that. That's interstate commerce. Okay, so keep that in mind. Again, McCulloch versus Maryland, that's an implied powers case. Again, trying to look at the powers between the national and the state governments. Again, these are the two federalism cases to know. Overall, McCulloch versus Maryland, is this a win for the states or the national government?
National government.
For sure it is. For sure it is. US v. Lopez, a win for the states, right? Where it kind of limits the powers of the Commerce Clause. So things to be aware of there. Again, we see varying cases where the Supreme Court will rule for the states or the national government. Another good one with federalism, and I'm a little bit surprised that it's not a required case, is Obergefell versus Hodges. That's not a required, okay, but it dealt with same-sex marriage, which again, hot button issue, especially about 10 years ago. Maybe not as much now, but at one point in time it was. And again, under Obergefell versus Hodges, that's where the national government said, hey, states, by the way, you don't have the right to limit the right of marriage based on who is marrying each other. If two men or two women want to get married, you have to allow them to do that. Again, marriage, reserve power had been a thing of the states for a long time, like North Dakota, for example. Up until the ruling on Obergefell, did not allow for same-sex marriages, did not recognize same-sex marriages from other states. Obergefell versus Hodges, decisions made. Well, now, states, they don't have a choice. They have to issue marriage licenses if two males or two females wish to marry each other, right? They cannot, quote unquote, discriminate in that regard. Again, which that case is viewed as not a win for the states, but a win for the national government. So again, things to be aware of there, just other things to make comparisons to. Okay. I think, just a couple of other things here. All right. So we got one last thing here for federal, or for topic or unit 1, excuse me. My bad. Again, federalism is very dynamic. It's constantly changing. Where the states might get some more authority, national government might get more authority, just understanding that. And again, this piece here is asking about the access points for public stakeholders. So voters, more or less, people that, live in the United States, I guess you'd be considered a stakeholder. What ability or what things can citizens do to influence public policy? Could just throw out some ideas. Big one is the one we do every couple of Novembers. What do we do?
Vote.
Protest.
Okay, vote's a big one. What's another way?
Protest.
Yep, bring attention to an issue. What else?
Door to door, signing petitions for stuff.
Yep. Circulate petitions, especially at the state and local level, for sure. Happens, it seems like every couple of years. Like there was a big deal in Castleton about raising the tax to fund the local rural ambulance. Okay, like that was a big thing this past summer. The bill that was on the ballot this past November about legalizing recreational marijuana in the state, that's another thing that people can do, right? States have that power. Okay, at the national government, a little bit different. You can contact your Congress people. You can contact various interest groups. You can call, right? You can run for public office. All those things are ways that we can influence our governments. Okay. Now, does one person hold a lot of power? I don't know. It probably depends on how deep your pockets are, unfortunately. I told the lobbying story to my government class today, and they were all shocked. Like, that actually happens? I was like, you bet it does. And that's probably not the worst thing that's ever happened with lobbying in North Dakota. Okay. The second one here, we're looking at how national policy, again, sometimes the national government, they're they can only do so much because of the states. So keep that in mind. There's some limitations of powers there, even though it might not always feel that way, that the national government cannot just go about passing whatever law it is, because of checks and balances, federalism, things of that nature. So I'd be aware of those things. Okay. Another big one here too. And Andy, I forget if you were here, but we sang the amendment song. That's a big part of federalism. Andy, can you sing the amendment song for us, please?
2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of both states. Bum, 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 bum.
That a boy. Okay. Again, that's another big part of federalism, right? If we want to add something to the Constitution, we want to change the Constitution, it has to be passed by a super majority of Congress and a super majority of the states. And so that's another thing here too. So keep those things in mind. Any questions on that from any of you? Again, I would say that pretty much every state in the union would probably prefer to have more power and more say so than they do. I mean, just look at the 24 states or whatever it is now that have legalized marijuana. Again, that's a clear-cut violation of the federal law, Controlled Substances Act. Hello. But the national government in recent years has really turned a blind eye to it because of the fact that there's tax money coming back. Okay. Like when I was first in high school in California legalized, I remember it was like every week there was breaking news about the DEA shutting down another dispensary. You don't hear about that anymore, right? when I was in Las Vegas a couple months ago, I walked down the Las Vegas Strip and it seemed like I don't want to say every major casino hotel, but a lot of them, they have like their outdoor shops. Like there was an outside booth where they were just selling marijuana out in the open. It was just baffling to me. I'm like, what? This is what's happening. But again, there's a variety of opinions on that, and mine for this purpose is not so much important. But I will say the national government definitely likes the taxes that they're making off of that. You can bet your bottom bouncer. Okay. Questions on any of those things?